DaviePHD's Mythbusters, Episode 6, 31st of August 2020. Many things are said about various issues surrounding Scotland, our relationship with the UK, the EU, independence, etc. So in these videos, I'm going to bust the myths that many people believe. This week's myth is the one that the 1707 Act of Union was entered into voluntarily. We often hear the Unionist side of this argument say that Scotland signed up to the Act of Union. There is a tiny little bit of truth in that. But just because no guns were being held to anybody's head or no swords were being held to anybody's throats doesn't mean it was entirely voluntary. Whilst it is true to say that the old Scottish Parliament voted by a majority to sign the Act of Union, the Parliament was not as representative of the people as it is today. And they weren't signing the Act from a position of strength, let alone a position of the equality we hear so much about. We were in fact skillfully engineered into a position of weakness when the offer was made. It's hugely important to note that the 1707 Act was by no means the first attempt to unite the very separate countries of England and Scotland into a unitary state. The first attempt was in 1072 by William the Conqueror. Others followed, notably Edward I, or Longshanks, in the late 13th century, and Henry VIII in the 17th century. It wasn't until the death of Henry's daughter, Elizabeth I, that there was any success, and that was by accident. Her closest living relative was James VI of Scotland, the 37-year-old king and son of her late first cousin, Mary, Queen of Scots. In 1603, James VI of Scotland also became James I of Great Britain, but only the crowns were united. The nations remained independent of each other. The first real suggestion of parliamentary union was made as early as 1607, just 4 years after the Union of the Crowns. It was the English Parliament that kicked this idea into touch. The further promotion of full union took place in the 1640s when the Scottish Parliament wanted a sort of federal union. Again, this was rejected by the English, and the idea continued to raise its head throughout the following decades. When war and politics failed, a new weapon was used: economics. England had always been a trading nation, where Scotland did most of her trade with England. This allowed England to start to build her empire. Scotland wanted to follow suit. An ambitious plan was hatched: the Darian Scheme. Scottish colonists would set up settlements on the east coast of the Isthmus of Panama. European ships would arrive with goods at the Atlantic side. Goods would be offloaded and transported by caravan to the Pacific side, where they would be loaded onto other ships bound for the west coast of America or Asia, and the whole process could be run in reverse from Asia to Europe. The scheme was ambitious, but it was a great idea, as later demonstrated by the stunning success of the Panama Canal. But the Darian Scheme was poorly executed and ill-timed. When the Scots landed and began to set up settlements, the Spanish in what is now modern-day Colombia felt threatened, and they blockaded the port of New Edinburgh. At the very same time, England was at war with France, and Spain was an ally. So in order not to insult the Spanish and risk their alliance in Europe, the English decided not to assist the Scots outposts in Panama. The Darian Scheme failed. Only 1,000 of the 3,000 colonists made it back to Scotland alive, and the nation's finances took a massive hit. Then, in 1705, the English Parliament passed the Alien Act. Now, we're not talking about extraterrestrials here, just foreigners, or Scots. The Alien Act provided that Scottish nationals in England were to be treated as aliens, foreigners, and estates held by Scots would be treated as alien property, making inheritance, collection of taxes and rents, and commerce in general much less certain. The Alien Act also included an embargo on the importation of Scots goods into England and English colonies. That was about half of our trade, covering goods like linen, cattle and coal. There was also an embargo on the export of arms, ammunition and horses to Scotland, so we could not raise an army to retaliate. A late offer to refund any losses from the Darian Scheme was the final nail in the coffin of Scottish independence. Forced into a corner, the Scottish Parliament conceded they would have to become a union, something England had wanted for about 700 years. With the Union in 1707, free trade was established along with a single parliament. The official explanation for England not intervening to save the Darian colonists was so as not to offend the Spanish. Its negative effect on Scots financial stability may have been an added benefit, but many feel it was in fact the real reason not to assist the Darian colonists was to advance the cause of union. Throughout Scots English history, land and title on both sides of the border has been given and taken. Many Scots nobles were as rich in English land and titles as they were in Scots, and vice versa. The Alien Act was a direct threat to that, designed to get the Scots nobles in Parliament to acquiesce to the union they had long resisted. Though the eventual union was brought about by an Act of Parliament, it was very different to what we have today. The Scots Parliament consisted of 244 members. 67 were nobles, 80 were shire members, 67 were constituent borough members, and the remaining 30 were officers of the state appointed by the Crown, the Union Crown. The nearest thing we had to an MP or MSP were the 67 constituency borough members. While they were elected, the franchise was only open to males who owned land in the borough. So less than 300 people, and only 67 of whom were tenuously elected, got to take part in a momentous decision that shaped the next 300 years. To say that a decision made in these circumstances was entirely voluntary is an extreme exaggeration, possibly even a downright lie, and to deny us the opportunity to revisit that decision whenever we choose to, with modern participative democracy, is unjust. The fact that less than 300 people had a say in this, and that the people who voted for it did so to protect their own interests rather than those of the people of Scotland, is a travesty. It's often said that the Act of Union saved Scotland from financial ruin. But the Union Crown and the English Parliament, through politics and economics, skillfully engineered the situation where finally, after 100 years of failed attempts, the Scots Parliament had little choice but to acquiesce to the Union. In conclusion, as Robert Burns once said, Scotland was bought and sold for English gold. The Union may have been entered voluntarily on paper, but the people who swung the decision the way it went didn't do so for the good of the normal people of Scotland, but for their own self-interest. And while it may be tenuously true that joining the Union saved Scotland from financial ruin, we have more than returned the favour by contributing troops to the many wars fought in the name of the Empire, and latterly by saving the entire UK from bankruptcy with our own Scottish-branded black gold. Even if it could be argued that we ever owed the UK anything, it's been repaid many times over. At this stage, we are even. It's time for us to take a step back, look each other in the eye as the equals we're supposed to be, and re-examine this relationship. I often hear people say that they're Unionists and they're Scottish patriots too. There are those in this movement who disagree vehemently with that position. I disagree with it, but I have some understanding for it. But even someone like that must surely understand that putting a Unionist party leader, especially Douglas Ross, in the First Minister's seat will lead to powers being surrendered to Westminster without a fight. Scotland will be silenced, stripped of power and disenfranchised. Holyrood will become the glorified council chamber many Conservatives wish it was if we put them in power. Whichever side of the Indie debate you're on, that can't be a good thing. Even if you would vote no in Indie Ref 2, the only way we'll get to look each other in the eye as the equals we're supposed to be and have that conversation and re-examine this relationship and get that better deal for Scotland is to vote SNP in the upcoming Scottish election. And that's true even if you would vote no in a second independence referendum, because voting SNP will prevent the powers that Holyrood currently has being surrendered. And however Indie Ref 2 goes and however way you vote on it, it represents the only real opportunity to better Scotland's deal. Folks, thanks for watching. Please comment on the Facebook page. Keep it civil at all times, please. DaviePHD.